Welcome to the Focus 3 podcast with Tim Kight and Urban Meyer. Yes, you heard that correctly. BK is moving on, has had a vision of some really cool stuff he's going to be pursuing, and we're excited for him. And when he let me know he was moving on, I began to think, who could I have on as a co-host of the Focus 3 podcast? And I asked myself the question, who do I have great conversations with about leadership and culture and competitive excellence? And I immediately thought, Coach, of you. So welcome as a co-host to the Focus 3 podcast.
Well, I've listened to your podcast, and it's an honor to be here and be part of it.
It's going to be fun. We're going to continue the same cadence and rhythm that BK and I have had. We're going to have conversations about things that matter in the world of performance, whether it's athletics or education or business, and it's pretty exciting. The theme today, the big message today is have a system and do the work. I think a lot of, would you agree with this, Urban, that a lot of leaders out there, they work hard, but they don't always have a system for leadership? Is that?
Well, I've got a lot of experience in obviously intercollegiate athletics, and I still am. As assistant athletic director, I meet with other coaches and other team members. One of the coolest things I could do was be part of a captain's program. All the captains at Ohio State, I meet with them once a month, and who doesn't want leadership? Who does not appreciate the value of leadership? I would say zero. Everybody appreciates it. However, I was a coach for 33 years, 17 as a head coach. I'm saying before I really met you and we really sat down and organized it, you have a system for offense, defense, kicking game. You have a system for discipline. You have a system for checking on academic excellence, et cetera. But how many in college sports have a system for leadership for your team? I did not. We did some magical things over the years, but one of the great things you shared with me is that average leaders use quotes and speakers. Good leaders have a little bit of a plan. And then exceptional leaders have a system, and that's what you brought to our program. We're very grateful, and it was, overwhelmingly successful.
Well, that's going to be our focus for this podcast. Let's get to work. So, Urban, you took that year off from Florida. You did the ESPN thing, and I've talked. You've learned a lot during that year, but then you made the decision to come back to coaching, and you took the job at Ohio State in 2012. So, when you took that job, what happened in 2012? What did you learn? What did you do? How did you make the transition from ESPN then into Ohio State and get your arms around Ohio State football 2012? Talk about that year.
Well, early in your career as a coach, you go study other people. It's very common as a young assistant coach, you would drive 5-6 hours to hear a great speaker. You would read books. You'll go visit programs, NFL and college. And what I found out, the more successful you get in college, you become a paranoid. You get in a cocoon and you want to shield everyone from coming in, and that also limits you as far as your growth, personal growth. So the year off, I visited Bob Stoops, Mac Brown, Chip Kelly, Bill Belichick, obviously, Joe Paterno. I visited Army and Coach Ellerson at Army. I just wanted to go out to West Point. And so I just wanted to better myself, learn what the great people, great coaches, what they were doing. And it would be my fourth program. I started off with Bowling Green, then Utah, then Florida, then Ohio State. And this is really critical, and I'd like to chat with you about this, is that whenever you take over an organization, if you say, I have the blueprint, that's a common thing that people say, this is what we're going to do. However, that's very disrespectful to the organization you're taking over. And so you have to really know the culture. You have to know what's the previous culture. You have to know what's there. What's the clientele you're dealing with? What are your players like? What's the academic support system like, the weight room, et cetera? And as the example I told you a little earlier today is that you take over a place like Bowling Green. Bowling Green needed a fire hose. There's a lot. They had back-to-back. 6 straight losing seasons. There was a lot of issues. You go to Utah. Utah was in pretty decent shape. They were a 5-6 type team. Had very good players. You go to Florida. Had excellent players. There were some issues there. And then you come to Ohio State, and Ohio State just lost one of the greatest coaches in college football history, Jim Tressel. And so it was a much different takeover than, say, a Bowling Green. And so you're very respectful of what was there. However, you're very transparent about what needs to change, and you go to work.
So a term that I use all the time is I believe exceptional leaders are master observers. They don't react or respond first. They think and they observe. They evaluate. And what I hear you saying is make a transition into, take over a program, take over a department, take over a company, that before you do anything, you have to understand the environment that you're coming into, and rather than impose your stuff on that environment first, you observe, you listen, you evaluate to understand what you're getting yourself into and what's in front of you. Is that the message there?
Absolutely. And one of the common errors, and I get very passionate about this, is when a coach takes over a program and you hear him say, wait till I get my people in there. They are your people. The minute you sign that contract or say I do, that's your company. That's them.
So you're talking about the moment you come into an organization, have an ownership mindset as a leader. So this is now it's now us, and you're not waiting to get your people in. That those are your people.
Yeah, it's the capital R word, the respect. You better respect, because once you show that, I didn't say be soft, but show great respect. For example, Bowling Green, I said we had to take a fire hose out where they had Josh Harris in the program, one of the greatest players of all time in the MAC conference. They had very good players in that program. There were some issues, and the mistake would have been is just say, wait till I get my own people in there. No, you love them, you care for them, you're very demanding, and you guys work together to build something special. So I love how you said that. I would, with observant, I'd say be very respectful and be very transparent about what your expectations are. But be very respectful to people there, because once they have to do, coach comes in or a CEO comes into a company, and I'm actually working with a company on this right now. You come into this, it might not be exactly like the other one you're used to. That's okay. You adapt as a leader. It's like Dwayne Haskins and Braxton Miller. Can there be more different quarterbacks that in college football?
Both awesome.
Both awesome players. Can you imagine being a coach and saying, well, Braxton really doesn't fit what we want? What, are you out of your mind? Or you say, Dwayne Haskins, he doesn't run like Braxton Miller, so I'm not sure we can do this. No, you adapt. Like you said, you observe and you adapt.
By that powerful combination, master observer and deep respect. That to start leading a group of people with that kind of observation and respect, that's a powerful start.
A company I'm working with right now, and they said, okay, we're taking over. We're working with this group. They've had some shortcomings. However, extremely talented individuals within that company. Could you imagine walking into that situation and being disrespectful? Maybe if you don't, even not by choice, but some of the things you say, your actions, you're being disrespectful. They shut it down completely, and now you just took a company that's struggling and it's imploded now.
So, do you think though that I know? Let's talk about maybe two different kinds of disrespect. One is one is just straight out disrespect in the sense of almost being rude, but the other one may be just one that's unintended. Because I don't think most leaders come in and they intend to be disrespectful, but they're overly aggressive initially, and they don't do this observation the way we're talking about it. And so the disrespect is often not intended. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. And it goes back to your BCD when you blame, complain, and defend, because we're all, especially the higher level you get, the more you're in the press, the more exposure you get, that it's not my fault. It must be their fault. And I've always taken, there's got to be some great, why are these people, first of all, they're division, I'm giving a football analogy, is they're Division I athletes, so there must be something there. Then you get to know them, you find out, wait a minute now, there is a lot there. Let's pull the greatness out of them. So the job of a leader, is to pull greatness out of people.
That's a great phrase.
Yeah,
that is an awesome phrase. We'll come back to that. Maybe not today's episode. How do you pull the greatness out of people? We have a strong educational audience for this podcast. What does every teacher who's a great teacher, what does he or she want to do? Pull the greatness out of young people. Obviously we got coaches who follow us. They want to pull the greatness out of their volleyball team, out of their baseball team, out of their swim team, their basketball team, and lots of business people. How do you pull the greatness out of your sales folks, out of your service people, out of the folks working on the shop floor, on the dock? Because I don't think people come to work saying, and I've said this a lot, I don't think people come to work going, today I'm going to be average. I'm coming to work to be mediocre today. But I think some leaders allow a culture to exist that actually reinforces mediocrity.
Absolutely. I think the word that goes right with everything you just said about the pulling greatness out of people, it's the R word. It's the respect. Once I didn't say, and that's where I think there's a lot of confusion. I know I've had that with assistant coaches on my staff and support members. And when I say respect, I didn't say warm and fuzzy. I didn't say soft. I didn't say, you think you're the greatest coaches and greatest teachers you've ever had, that I've ever had, are the toughest. They're the most demanding, but they care deeply for you and they have great respect for you. And that's been the blueprint of everything we've done. We run a different style of offense. That's fine. We show great respect. I didn't say warm and fuzzy. I didn't say I'm going to compromise my values because you're a nice person. No, we have a job. We all have a job to do here. And I'm going to show you great respect. And I'm going to do everything I can to pull greatness out of you. If that person understands that you care deeply for them and you respect them, that's when mountains start to get moved. That's when greatness starts to happen, because it's much different than the warm and fuzzy approach that I've seen leaders fail when, well, let's have a group hug. That's fine. I don't necessarily agree with that. I'm not coming to work for a group hug. I'm coming to work every day because I want to see these people I'm working with. I want to see them maximized. God gave them these great skills. Let's maximize them. Yeah. How do you do that? Respect them and push them.
The way I like to phrase it is elevate your love without lowering your standards. And I actually was with a client this past week in Seattle, and our big message to all the managers was push people really hard, or love people really deeply, and then push them really hard. That combo, and again, and I said, the love isn't a feeling. Love's a choice, actually. Love isn't how you feel, love's what you do. It's what motivates you. It's the respect. I mean, you can call it care, love, respect, lots of words for it, but you have to do that. It's the relational side. And you and I believe this deeply, you can't push people any further than the level of trust you have built with them. And I think it takes humility to do what you just said. I think, that's a hard thing to come by for some leaders.
Well, it's really never been hard for me. It's been hard because I always see there's a finish line. There's a point B. You got a point A where we're at. There's a point B where we have to get.
Yeah.
And for some reason, my entire life, I've never had a problem. I've had a lot of other things that I've struggled with in leadership or management, like we all have. However, that's never been a struggle for me. We're here. How do we get to point B? If we're in point A. How do we get to point B? There's only one chance, and that's everybody working together for the common good, and that's the only chance. And down the road, I'm sure we'll talk about solve the mystery, but how do you get these group of people to be maximized? Mm-hmm. And warm and fuzzy, compromised values, no. Pushing each other, developing trust, and then pushing for greatness.
I'd make the case that if you don't push people really hard, you don't really love them. I think if you love somebody, you need to set high standards and push them. A leader is someone who gets people to do things that they wouldn't do without the influence of the leader, which is a very strong statement. A leader is someone who gets people to do things they wouldn't have done without the influence of the leader, which is a super high calling.
I have another that's exactly a little different way of saying it. And Lieutenant Charles Buchanan, who I'm a co-teacher with at the School of Business here at Ohio State, a great leader, a great coach, gets people to do the unthinkables.
There we go.
How do you get, when you think of the men and women who serve our country, to get them to do some of the things that they do, there's only one way they do it: love of unit, love of each other. How do you get a football player? I'm not talking about scoring touchdowns, throwing touchdown passes, making a sack. Those are all fun things. People want to do those. How about the unthinkables? How do you get people to run down at 22 miles an hour on kickoff when someone's coming at you 15, 20 miles an hour the other way? How do you get them to train and grind throughout the summer months? And how do you get them to do that? To get exceptional performance, there's only one way, and it's the love and respect word.
Yeah, and how do you get a fourth grader to do homework they don't want to do? How do you get someone working deep within the bowels of the organization? There's tedious, grinding kind of work that has to be done for the operation of that company to be effective and efficient. Leadership is required for that to happen. So 2012, you come back home to Ohio State. what happened that year? Talk about 2012.
Well, 2012, I've been a Buckeye my entire life. Obviously, I've had and worked at great universities, but I grew up 2 hours from here, and there's a little bit within our family not to do it, to take some time off. But when Gene Smith called and President Gee called, it felt like we need your help. There was some struggles going on. We would later find out a couple weeks after I took the job that we lost 9 scholarships, that we were on probation, no bowl game, and any player could transfer immediately without loss of a year. So before I took the job, I actually had an NCAA, someone who worked for the NCAA. I paid him to research to say what chance, because I wasn't going to take the job. If they said you're going to lose 9 scholarships in a bowl game, I wasn't going to do it because that's usually set up for failure. So I take the job, and sure enough, Gene Smith walks in a couple of weeks later and says, we got bad news. And he tells me. I sat down, put my face in my hands, said, we're done. We're done. You're going to lose 9 scholarships. How do you compete? You're going to have people can transfer immediately. How do you compete? And I remember I just put my face in my hands, and then finally, I prayed. I said, what do I do here? And I just felt this overwhelming sense of get to work. Let's go, man. Let's go. And so I called a meeting within 15 minutes, and all the seniors in the room, and I put it on them. I gave them ownership of everything we're doing. You know how many kids transferred? None. Not one. They loved the university that much. They loved their teammate. I think there was somewhat blind faith, because they didn't know me, in that we might do something special. And that was one of the most special years, one of the hardest years that we've ever had.
How did you? So you challenged the seniors. You told them about this unexpected, unwanted, but now you've got this. You're losing scholarships. Guys can transfer. We're not going to go to a bowl game. How did you get them to commit?
Well, that was a pivotal time. If you think about how fragile.
Because it's a new staff too. It's not just new head coach. It's a whole new staff. Luke Fickell came over.
That wasn't finished yet. Yeah. When I found out, our staff wasn't complete. Yeah. And you think about corporate America, you think about special forces. I always call them the three silos. You have corporate America, you have elite athletic teams, and you have elite special forces in the United States military. You're talking about elites, not just corporate America, elite corporate America, not just intercollegiate athletics, the elite teams. And then you got the special forces. Yeah. And how do you get people to perform at this high level? It goes back to that love and respect. And that team meeting I had, or that meeting I had with that group, if I didn't make it clear that there are people, you're ours now. If I would have said, you guys are part of that other regime, that's the first thing that we had to do is break that ice, say, wait a minute, we are all in this together and we need you. This is your program, you own this. And we went to work, and to this date, looking back whenever that was 8 years ago, one of the most gratifying, and I'm still so close, from the Zach Bournes to Johnny Simons to Jack Mehorts, those I'm as close to them as any group of players I've ever been around.
And you went undefeated in that first year.
Well, the first game we were losing to Miami, Ohio in the first quarter, end of the first quarter, 7-0, and it wasn't because we fumbled or something. It was because we were that bad. There was a lot of resistance. We couldn't. The coach that I replaced was Luke Fickell, and he replaced Jim Tressel, a beloved coach. Luke Fickell took over a program, a lot of suspensions, a lot of things going on. I had great admiration for both coaches. We kept Luke Fickell, Coach Fickell, who's now the head coach at Cincinnati. And it was the coaches and players were not on the same page. Our system of leadership, our style of going to work was much different than Jim Tressel's. And I'm not being critical one way or the other because obviously he's extremely successful, very good friend. And there's a tendency when things are a lot different, when the other one experienced great success, to be resistance. And there was a tremendous amount of resistance.
I'd like to maybe in a future podcast talk about change.
Sure.
Because that's a huge issue. So there was some resistance, but you got their attention enough to win 12 games. I mean, you went undefeated that season. I distinctly remember the Purdue game, which was pretty interesting because it was in Ohio State. It was a home game, and Purdue was beating Ohio State, and Braxton goes down with an injury, and in comes Kenny Guyton. At the end of the game, in Ohio State, you're down by 8 points, I believe.
8 points, 50 seconds left.
And Kenny Guyton comes off
No timeouts.
Yeah, no timeouts. Other than that, no problem. He comes in and leads the team down the field to score a touchdown in the waning seconds of the game, convert the 2-point conversion to tie the game up, goes into OT, and then you beat Purdue. And And half the stadium had left because they thought there was no way that Ohio State can win the game, but you did. And so something had happened where the players were playing with this level of focus and discipline and competitive excellence that allowed you to do that. So what was going on? What made that happen?
You're bringing back great memories, and this might take a second, but leading up to that, there was a time we played Cal Berkeley, and Cal Berkeley was an okay team. We somehow won the game. We did not play well. It was an ugly win. Right at the end, we won the game. I saw what I saw on the field, and I had that bad feeling in my stomach that this was a bad team we're coaching. And I went through the BCD myself.
Bad in the sense of what?
Not performing.
Okay.
And I started blaming players.
Good guys.
Yeah, but back then, at that moment, I thought we have bad players. They lost 7 games the year before. And the BCD mentality that you teach so well is you're going to blame others, you're going to complain what you don't have, and you're going to defend yourself.
Which is not
and
good,
I was
right?
right in the middle of that.
Okay.
They're not my players. This coaching staff, I'm going to make some changes on the coaching staff. So I was in a full BCD mode. We win that game. There's a player named John Simon, one of the Tebow tough. As tough a human being and good as a player and young man as I've ever been around. And he has a bad shoulder, should not have played. He comes in after that game. We give him the game ball. He gets up in front of that team. I am so angry standing behind him, just looking at what I see about wishing I had my old players or wishing I had this, wishing I had that. He gets up and starts sobbing, can't finish his speech. I go home at night and I just don't sleep at all that night, just stare at the ceiling.
What was his message? What was he saying?
He couldn't talk because his shoulder hurt so bad. He gave everything he could for love of teammate. Remember now, these players could have transferred. They stayed. Why did they stay? Not for the bowl game. There's no bowl game. They stayed for love of university, love of team. I'm the head coach. I didn't have that same love. I'm staring at the ceiling, so upset with myself. BCD left. Now I was self-evaluating, saying, "What?"
You stopped blaming, stopped complaining, stopped defending.
And I self-evaluated, and it was awful. Here's a 20-year-old young man that can get up like that and feel that way about his teammates. Here's the head coach who's supposed to be the leader that was so angry I couldn't even talk to the team. And it was blaming them, not me. However, I was the problem. And ironically, not ironically, but I'm very strong in my faith. I think spiritual intervention. On the next morning, we had a little church service for our players. And the guy talked about CST, choice, sacrifice, time. If you love something so dearly, you have to have all 3. Choice is no longer a choice. They become commitments. You decide to get married. It's not a choice. You're not going to cheat on your wife. It's a commitment, a command. Commitment. You have to, it's a commandment. Choices become commandments. And so choice, sacrifice, if you have things in your life, what do? You have to kill it. You can't provide energy to it. The laziness, the complaining, the selfishness, that has to leave the program. And time. How do you spell love? Time. And so before you can, did I really have choices that became commandments for my team? Did I sacrifice the negative thoughts, all the things at the BCD? No, I did not. And did I give the players the amount of time that I should have given them? No. So I graded myself very poorly. I had a great team meeting the next day, and that team from that point forward, they understood the word love. And I was not directing it all at them. I was directing it at me and our coaching staff. Because our coaching staff was following my lead. We were a horrible coaching staff. Up to that point, from that point forward, one of the best coaching staffs I've ever had.
That's a vivid picture. That is a vivid picture.
And it was taught to me by a 21-year-old person that was the one actually doing the work with a shoulder that he shouldn't have played, John Simon.
So this is my point about that all requires humility. Had you been a typical arrogant coach or leader, you would have continued to have this BCD mode, right? So Simon gets up and talk, and you would have not really heard it. But as John is talking in the locker room after the game, you started to self-evaluate, which is the heartbeat of humility. And look at yourself with respect for the standards, not just for your own perspective. And you saw something in yourself that you said, I got to fix that. My mindset's not where it needs to be. Okay.
And time was of essence.
Yeah.
It's not something you had the off season to get fixed. You had to get fixed right now.
Yeah.
And BCD, which I want to hit that really hard, that's to say we're not going to experience BCD today, tomorrow, the next day. We experience it every day. That's a coach killer. That's a team killer. That's a business killer. You have to self-evaluate. Most times when you self-evaluate, there's something in there you don't like.
Yeah.
And you got to fix it. You got to fix it fast.
So again, just for those of you who aren't fully familiar with it, BCD means blame, complain, defend. And it is a culture killer. It is a relationship killer. It's a performance killer. It doesn't work. And it's super popular. And unfortunately, it's very social. We don't BCD by ourselves. We recruit others and include others into it. But here's the thing, folks, about BCD. It doesn't achieve any goals. It doesn't solve any problems, and it doesn't improve relationships. And what we tell folks, that what's seductive about BCD is that most of the time, the things that we're BCDing about exist. I mean, they tend to be real problems. The problem, though, isn't that the problem exists. The problem is we're complaining about it, blaming people, and defending self rather than solving it. So we tell people this. Instead of BCD, two things: resolution or resilience.
That's great.
And instead of BCD, resolution. Go solve the problem. Put it on the table, bring a team of people around it and say, that's a problem. Here's why it's a problem. What are we going to do to fix it?
And be transparent if you're part of the problem.
Yes.
Because most of the time, you are.
Yeah.
As a leader, you are the problem. And I identified that, and I had the greater good was Ohio State football, and these players. It was not the coaching staff. It certainly was not me. And it was as vivid as a picture as I've ever had in my coaching career, that I was the issue. And I fell into that same mode that many leaders fall into, not just in corporate America, not just on athletic teams, not just in elite special forces. Wait till I get my guys in here. Yeah. Once I get my peoples, we'll be fine. Wait a minute. The minute you raised your hand and said, I'm part of this organization, those are your peoples. Yeah. Make them great.
So here's what I'm thinking. And I heard this quote years ago, and I've never forgotten it. Sometimes the problem isn't the problem. Sometimes the way you're responding to the problem is the problem. Yeah. Which I think is true a lot. Because the notion that we're not going to have issues, we're not going to have problems. Every day when that alarm goes off in the morning, you better be ready to solve problems. And this is the thing that I love so much about what we teach is we give people tools to do that, to respond to the challenges and the issues and the difficulties and the problems. But I'm going to say it again. Sometimes the problem isn't the problem. Sometimes the way you're responding to the problem is the problem. And I think that ought to be a core leadership belief, that every leader needs to have that in his or her mindset when they go to work every day.
I would go probably a little deeper and say that the problems are not the problem, because you name it something that doesn't involve problems and that doesn't exist. That's utopian. We all know that doesn't exist. And the world that I've been in for 3 decades plus 3 decades is that how a leader handles that problem. And I'm certainly not one to say we've been perfect. We haven't. However, when you start putting the team ahead of yourself, when you start having the fundamental values of life about, the greater good versus you, that's when problems get solved rather quickly. And you have to you have to have the self-evaluation, and you also have to surround yourself with a couple, not a lot, but a couple people you can have that conversation with. And it's not comfortable. I'm not doing a good job. Help me through this. How do we get better? There's point A and there's point B. We have to get to point B. Am I part of the problem not allowing us to get point B? That's as uncomfortable a conversation you have with yourself that there is. However, the great leaders I've been around, the Bill Belichick's, the Jamie Dimons, the Phil Knights, that's the lessons I've learned from those kind of people.
So 2012 ends, you're undefeated, and then you're now looking at 2013. So like every year, some guys leave. Well, guys leave because they graduate. Some go to the NFL. And now, you're in the off season, and you and I actually meet in the spring of 2013. We're at a fundraiser at your house, and we didn't know each other. And I remember it distinctly. I was standing there with Brenda, and I had a Diet Coke in one hand and hors d'oeuvres in the other, and you walked by, and you kind of came back and looked at me in the face and said, do I know you? You look familiar to me. And I missed a great opportunity, by the way. I should have said, yeah, my name's Tim Kight. What's your name? But I missed that opportunity. And we got to talking, and you asked me what I did for a living, and I told you leadership and culture. And that started a conversation that has been going on for 7 years.
Right.
What got your attention? And I shared the performance pathway. Well, what happened is you invited me down to the facility. BK and I came down, sat down in your office.
Next morning.
Yeah, we communicated the performance pathway and E plus R equals O. And you and Coach Mick, David was at the meeting as well. David's doing our production today. You leaned into that. You could not get enough of it. What got you? What was it about the Focus 3 system that grabbed you?
Well, first of all, I'm somewhat introverted. For me, at a cocktail party to come up to someone,
It was not a cocktail party. Come on, it was
whatever it was.
Yeah, okay.
It was Athletes in Action fundraiser.
Yeah, definitely not a cocktail party.
But for me to do that, I remember doing it very clearly. And you said two things. You said I'm a leadership consultant, and I later find out that you were a pastor at one point. You have a master's degree in Scripture. Those are two very, other than my family and coaching football, those are the two areas that I study the most, and I'm intrigued. I have an appetite that's really hard to fill up. And so you were down, I invited you down the next morning, and then when we began talking, I saw we had exactly the same belief system. I saw an opportunity to systematize something that I am so passionate about. It's called leadership. And big picture, I saw an opportunity for us to get better.
So there, you quoted it earlier, because we told you back then, you asked us what do coaches struggle with? What is it about leadership development that's challenging for most coaches? And we said, well, average coaches have quotes, good coaches have plans, and elite coaches have systems for everything. And like you said a moment ago earlier in this episode, systems for offense, defense, special teams, strength and conditioning, recruiting, academic excellence. But most coaches don't have a system for building leaders. And we say system, we mean something simple but systematic that you can constantly work on to improve.
That's it. That's the key. So offensive football or plan to win. We have a plan to win at Ohio State, and it is play great defense. It's ball security. It's score in the red zone, have a strong kicking game. That has to be regurgitated over and over again to be part of someone's DNA, or it's simply a speech. It's simply a handout. It's the same thing in leadership development. What I found out, and I didn't know this because I was very passionate about leadership, but to say that I completely understood how it had to be systematized, I did not. To say that it didn't work, we won 2 national championships in Florida. We did great things as far as leadership, however, it was not systematized. And it has to be that to become part of your DNA, or it's simply a speech. Mm-hmm. It's simply a handout. And I was guilty of it. Imagine running offensive football and without a system. And you see it. All you got to do is turn on, and there's been times where we've looked that way, where it's a grab bag outfit. Why are they running that play? That has nothing to do with their system. Same thing with defense, same thing with kicking game. However, when you start to systematize the leadership and you see instantaneous results, first of all, within yourself as you teach it, because who's the teacher of leadership in a football program? The head coach. If you hand that off to someone else all the time, then that's not yours. You're not owning it, and you have a speaker. And R factor, brotherhood of trust, and then we usually have one other element that I would think of throughout the summer, we would think of throughout the summer, that whether it be the grind, whether it be the chase, whether it be the win the moment, be a 5. Those are the other elements. However, R factor and brotherhood of trust. Pillars to this day, and Ryan Day is keeping them. They are part of the DNA of not only the team and the organization. When our players leave, I still hear it. I still see it. It's become part of them. And I'd like to think that's a little bit of part of our legacy.
Yes.
Are they going to be a better husband with R factor, or a better father? Absolutely. Will they be a better teammate in their life, and if they're in NFL or in corporate America? Absolutely. It's become part of the DNA.
So the theme for today, have a system and do the work. So the first thing would be the system you're talking about, and we implemented E plus R equals O, R factor, event plus response equals outcome, which I think our audience is pretty familiar with. And we began teaching that first to the leadership council and then to the entire team. And I think...
And the coaching staff.
Yes.
Because I think, let's stop there for just a second, that teachers, when you start dealing, it's called small unit cohesion. At some point, we'll get to this. But when you start moving beyond the 15 to 20 people, the 20 square feet, you start moving beyond that small group, there's too much chaos. Just sit in a room with 150, 250 people, and just keeping everyone's attention's hard. You get in close quarters, now you can really get into someone's space, and you can start to really now. It becomes interactive. It becomes ownership.
So this is the piece that I want to make sure people hear clearly. Having a system is half of it, but doing the work's the other half. So have a system and do the work. And the purpose of the system is to focus the work.
Okay. And then what is the system, which we'll talk about that in a minute. But then who's going to do the work?
Yeah.
That's where leaders fail. well, I'm going to hand it off to Tim Kight and his associate, his son, to go do the work. No, they're not the head coach. They don't see them every day. Our assistant coaches, and I give them credit to this day, were phenomenal. But it was driven by me and you. And I made it so clear that this is a non-negotiable, to the point, as I said, that it would be insubordination if we don't do exactly. Now, there's some things that I'll give you freedom. However, our factor, brotherhood of trust, that's part of our infrastructure or DNA.
So I say all the time to our corporate clients when they hire us, I said, it's not my job to build behavior skill in your company. It's not my job to build culture in your business. It's not my job to build leaders. It's your job. And I say, my job is to give you tools to help you do the work. So I'm going to give you a system that's simple, that's clear, simple, and actionable. And then we're going to equip you with those tools. And then you've got to go build that in your organization. And that's where I think this theme of have a system and do the work is very powerful. And I know that from my talk with Ohio State football fans and people out there, that there's a lot of misunderstanding of how much work we've done at Ohio State in implementing this system. And again, the work, to your point, it's my work, my job, the effort that I put in is to equip the team, the coaches and the players. But then the coaches have to go, and then the player leaders have to do the work. The amount of work that those coaches and players have put in over the years to build this culture at Ohio State football, and that Ryan's doing now, I don't think people understand that.
Well, you got to believe it first. If this was first of all, everything that is taught, that you taught us, and really it's what I taught in the past, everything that we systematize, our factor, that's a time-tested truth. That's not a subjective truth. That's truth. When you start, I'm sure at some point you'll review that, but
by the way, I say all the time, E plus R equals O is how life works. Your job is to get good at it.
Well, just for the people listening, just a quick synopsis is, how do you respond to an event in your life? And the way I look at, there's a taught behavior, a purposeful, intentional behavior, and then there's the god-awful impulsive behavior, which is we're following peoples. That's not good. That's when bad things happen. And so that became day one, the minute it sat on my board for 7 years in my office, the exact writings.
I remember when Brian wrote that. He went up to the board and wrote E plus R equals O, discipline over default, and the 6 disciplines. That right. was there for a long time.
And I wrote Do Not Erase, and it was there forever.
Yeah.
And that became part of our. But once again, if it wasn't brought into the small units, if it wasn't repeated daily, that would have been nothing more than, I talk to you about this all the time, is, I've been to so many speeches, I've been to so many banquets, and I've been asked to do so many. You always like to leave them something, or get up there and tell jokes, and then it's pure entertainment, which is fine. I've sat in entertainment too. I've been to some good shows in Vegas, and that's entertainment. However, if you're trying to get a nugget, if you're trying to get better, if you're trying to get from point A to point B, and you want to fill your toolbox to get along the way, I think that's so essential that there's something that you can leave with people, and then the people continue to drive home with their team or their organization. Yeah.
So let's wrap this up, because I think there's a lot to talk about on this next phase of this journey. Because, and I hate to bring it up, but 2013 went great through the regular season.
Here we go.
Then we go to the Big Ten championship and we lose to Michigan State. And I remember the locker room, and I remember the field, the locker room, and by the way, in the locker room after that game, you were magnificent in the way you addressed the football team, and getting them to embrace the pain and then refocus because we have a bowl game. I distinctly remember that, and commenting to you about it, and I thought you responded extremely well as that game wound down, and then we led the team and messaged the team in the locker room. But then tons of work, and we played Clemson in the Orange Bowl. And again, I know it stings, but we lost that game too. So now Ohio State football, Urban Meyer, 24-2. And now we hit the winter of 2014. So we're going to stop there, and I'm going to pick that up in the next episode, because some really powerful things happened. And 2014 was a year to remember, but it didn't start that way. But there were some very specific things where we just went to a whole nother level. Trust the system and do the work. See you next time.